Padraig Danaher, welcome back to the show.
Dan, how are you, sir?
By popular demand.
Thanks,
I was telling you before, like the episode that we did, I'm sure most people listening to this now have listened to that episode. It did fantastically well, but not only did it do fantastically well, the feedback and the comments that I got were amazing. That's not only that, I really, really enjoyed the conversation too.
Likewise.
So, and just to remind people, that was your first ever podcast.
It was indeed. No, it was great. It was a really enjoyable experience for me and kind of gave me the taste of doing more and getting that information out. So thanks for that.
No, and thank you. I'm going to give you 30 seconds on the clock here because you very kindly, you kind of delved into your background, your story in the first episode. So if you haven't heard Padraig's story, it's there. It's available on other platforms. But 30-second elevator pitch. Who are you? What's your name and where'd you come from, as Cilla Black used to say?
So my name is Padraig. I'm an occupational therapist. I have my own practice in Cork as the OT coach. I work with teenagers and adults who have difficulties with their mental health. I work specifically with complex trauma, but also eating disorders, self-harm behaviour, and any other difficulties that a young person might face.
23 seconds.
Boom, next.
And this is good. You've actually cheated. I mean, you've done several podcasts since you've done my podcast last time. So
my apologies.
You've got the practice now. Okay, thank you very much for that.
No worries.
So that's what you do and who you are, and gives you a bit of context for people as to why we're going to talk about the things we're going to talk about. The second point I will make is, because we want to be very careful about this, we are going to use the word trauma a lot in this podcast, but this podcast is not about trauma. So if you're listening now and you're going to go, the lads have already done over 2 hours on trauma, are they going to do the same thing again? No. But it's important that we clarify and understand a few of these words. Something I said to you when we were speaking over the last couple of days as well, this word is starting to become another one of those words, like holistic and all these words that kind of get sullied when they enter the, and for good reason, they enter the mainstream purview, but then they get slightly overused and misinterpreted sometimes, and they almost become a word that turns people away from potentially engaging with podcasts or content, because you're like, oh, another dude banging on about his trauma. What's the song going around? Two white boys in a podcast.
I heard that. That's right.
Talking about their trauma. That's not what this is going to be. But we are going to start off, and if you would kindly facilitate me on this, to just to define a few kind of terms, the main one kind of being complex trauma. What is that, and how does it relate to trauma? And you mentioned big T, little t, and just terminology like that I think is important.
I suppose complex trauma would be a series of events that have happened, not just maybe a singular one. That would be the difference. So if there was a number of events that happened, you would experience complex trauma, and that could be a lot of neglect, abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse. They would be seen as experience complex trauma, going to war, witnessing something horrendous like a car accident, being in a car accident. And then you have the small t and the big T. You'd hear that a lot. So some people don't pay as much attention to the small t. The small t might be having a mother that's an alcoholic, and you might think that's not that big of a deal, but there's a series of small t's that come with it. So small bits of trauma where they were disconnected, you were left alone, you were felt unloved, you didn't see them, and you were put at risk of many other things, maybe dealing with hunger, those other issues where your needs weren't met. So a series of small t's can end up being as serious as one serious incident. So I think it's good to understand that. And yes, trauma is all over the place at the moment, and it does dilute the power of it, I feel. It's good to bring awareness to it, but when there's people speaking about traumatic experience, or they've impacted by trauma, or putting that foot forward all the time, it can devalue it a little bit. So just to be clear what trauma is, like trauma, a traumatic experience will sit with you for a long, long time after you've experienced it. So if people go through stress and they're in a stressful environment at work, or they're in a stressful situation, a stressful relationship, and then they leave the relationship and they leave the work, and they've left the traumatic or the stressful situation, that isn't trauma. Trauma is when you leave that environment, but your body is hypervigilant and still undergoing serious stress, and that your response to similar situations, or even sometimes safe situations, are not appropriate or not aligned. So that would be trauma. I think it's just good to be clear on that side, and I don't want to, as you said, to hold focus on trauma, but I think it will come up with a lot of the topics that we're speaking about.
For sure, yeah. One of the biggest takeaways, I think, from our last episode and last conversation together, and I keep doing this with my fingers, is how like overwhelmed almost I was when you were describing something could happen to a child in our last conversation with mostly about children we spoke about, and it's not necessarily the thing, but all of the other things then that are triggered by that thing, and the constant triggering that was started off by the thing that just starts to overlap and create behaviors that create more triggers that shape your environment that then have an impact on you. And I was like, Jesus. I think I remember saying in that podcast, like, we've no fucking hope with all of this mess.
Yeah.
But another thing that we want to lay down as a foundation for this conversation as well is the idea that, yes, it's important to understand this, and yes, maybe it's important to identify certain areas of your life that are triggering or traumatic or things that happen to you. But also, my biggest thing is it's so important to be able to live your life as well. So I think what I would love to be able to do in this episode is to discuss some of the strategies that we can use to do that, to live our life. I mentioned to you before, and I say this often on the podcast, I am just a normal bloke. I happen to be in this environment where I meet many incredible people like yourself. So it's opened my eyes to a whole new world of health and wellness and performance and connection and compassion. But at the end of the day, I'm just some dude. And most of the people I grew up with are just guys and girls who are your average, whatever that means, person who don't have access to this information. If I can translate that somehow from the world of magic and mystery, and as we were laughing, dancing around trees in our leopard skin trousers and throwing fairy dust in the air, if I can translate the value that lives there to the average bloke, to the Dan living in the normal world, I think that's our job done. So I think that's what we'll aim for today, is that we've got to live our lives. Here's some stuff that doesn't involve you doing anything that's outside your comfort zone, but that can help you maybe start to unravel some of this mess.
I agree.
And live a normal life. That'd be fair enough.
Yeah. And it's I fully agree. And I think the earlier, and I know we're focused a lot on adults, but the earlier we can tackle that traumatic experience, the more we can work through it, and it doesn't become part of our identity. You have to be very careful you don't fall in the rabbit hole of a survivor or a victim, and that mentality will not serve you at all. If that's like, there's so much to people that are beautiful, and we need to identify that as like, I'm an entrepreneur, or I'm a dad, or I'm a survivor. I'm like, when we hold on to that, and that comes to the forefront of how we introduce ourselves, we've taken on that role. So identity is a really important survival tool to come over that wound. And trauma actually is the Greek for wound. So, and I think I like visualization of, when I think of a traumatic experience, what's that like? And to visualize that you could have an open wound and it can be touched and you could be triggered by that. So what do we need to do to cover that wound, to support that wound, to make it become a scar where we don't actually feel it anymore and it can't be touched? And there's loads that we can do in our day-to-day to ensure that. And I think we touched on this previously, but for that average bloke who might have difficulty attending counselling, or the idea of therapy is they don't want to engage in it, or they don't want to admit that they need it, what do they need to do? What information do they need? Because for me, in my experience, they're the ones struggling the most. And they're the ones that, in a result, have taken their own lives, have serious drug and alcohol addictions to soothe pain. And Gabor will always say, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. And all of that behaviour is trying to soothe that. We're trying to soothe ourselves. We're trying to just get by. So we'll take it from our mobile phone use to not having to sit with ourselves. We spoke about that in the last. Anything to avoid sitting with ourselves and sitting with emotions, will do it. So that could be mobile phone use, it can be porn, it can be alcohol, it can be drugs, it can be any negative behaviour. We can replace a lot of them with positive ones, and ones that will actually be really beneficial to soothe our pain and meet our needs. And they're based around social connections. We spoke about that earlier, about men in general being notoriously terrible for that. And it's terrible for speaking out and saying, I need help, but also just reaching out and keeping those social connections alive, and ones that aren't based around alcohol.
Okay.
I think are important.
Okay, so let's put a pin in those two things then, identity and the tools we can use, because that's what we're going to aim for. We spoke a lot about young people and children in the last episode, which is where your expertise, I suppose, lies, and a lot of your experience lies. But with people who are older, what are some of the things, because these are the things now that might resonate with people listening, and I believe this is it's a spectrum, it's a scale. A lot of us will deal with many of these things at certain levels. Maybe we're not all addicted to heroin on the street, but we might have a problem with food, for example, an addiction there or something like that. So what are some of the more kind of prevalent and common things you're seeing now? And then maybe we'll discuss how the landscape is maybe shifting over the last 15, 20 years.
So the prevalent maladaptive behaviour, or the prevalent things that you could do to...
The maladaptive behaviours. Yeah.
So I would see drug use, I would see addictions with mobile phones a lot, and to just be like people say, but everyone looks at their phone. Like an addictive behaviour is something that you can stop. That's stopping
compulsion,
you.
Isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And that you want to stop. That in turn, like when it comes to addiction is about you're trying to soothe the pain, but that soothing behavior becomes the pain, and it just becomes this loop that you can't get out of. So, i.e., the mobile phone use soothes that pain, but it makes you disconnected from people that you should be connecting and doing the things you should be doing. Alcohol, drugs, very, very similar. They soothe the pain, but in turn they cause pain. So to soothe that pain, you continue using the behavior. So it becomes that loop. So drugs, alcohol, mobile phone use would be the ones that porn as well, with a lot of young men. And I could go into a long rant around porn, just the aggression that they're witnessing at the moment, and how that is like getting very extreme, and what they're talking to me about. And it's just that rabbit hole that they're gone into, and that disconnect from human connection and seeking it through a device. But rather than seeking what do I need to do to have a romantic connection, I'm getting those needs met, done in my room by myself, by looking at two other people aggressively having sex, not actually making love. But that could...
Can I ask you questions as we go here? I'm going to really interrupt you as we go through this section, because there's stuff that pops into my head that I will forget. I recently listened to a conversation on, I'm not going to quote it because I can't remember exactly who it was, but there was a proclaimed expert in studying human psychology and neuroanatomy and stuff like this, talking about porn use, and basically claiming that there were no real solid links being presented between porn use or abuse and negative, like measurable negative outcomes in the brain. But my question is, and I have an issue sometimes with this appeal to numbers all the time. I'm a believer in science. Let me just say that right now before people start throwing shoes at the phone. I'm a believer in science. I like science, and I trust science. I trust the scientific process. But a lot of what I see is not the scientific process, because it's basically saying unless we have categorically proven it, it doesn't exist. Which for me means, well, okay, does it... the vast majority of things about the world we don't know and haven't tested and may never be able to test categorically. Doesn't mean they don't exist. So there's a weird line for me there. But to say something like that doesn't make sense to me when I can definitely sense and see a change in people when they struggle with behaviours like this. But my question for you is, you've boots on the ground. You are dealing with people who have a problem using porn, for example. Do you see a problem? Do you see a change in these people?
Hugely.
Okay.
And I think it's really important to question any person who advocates, including myself, and look at the literature that they're referencing, because studies can shape a direction, and it can be a study of 3 people.
Yes.
Like, you can reference studies all day long. They don't have to be peer-reviewed journal articles. They can just be a study of 6 people so that you can sway a study. And so I think be really mindful when you're looking at something and they say it's referenced or there's a study. Yeah. Look at the study, question the study. Who funded the study? How have they guided it? So I think...
I think it caught me because he was claiming that the cohort of evidence that we currently have, i.e. all studies, point this direction.
I question that, because for me, my day-to-day experience with a lot of young men, they're speaking about erectile dysfunctions, they're speaking about loneliness, they're speaking about being completely disconnected, they're speaking about their sexual interactions after watching a lot of porn being very poor, and I'd hear that from females as well, what their expectations are, and they're 17, 18 years of age, preparing themselves, and they were like, what we have to do to meet the needs of young men who are watching aggressive porn. It's not, it mainstream has become quite aggressive. So they're really disconnected. So the romantic sexual connection, like kissing isn't really involved in pornography. Which is madness to think that the intimacy, there's no intimacy. It's not about intimacy anymore. It's about sex. It's about ejaculating. So I would see a lot of young men being very disconnected from what a relationship is, and saying it, advocating, I'm so lonely, and this is where I get my needs met, and I know this isn't serving me. So I'm looking at evidence very clear in front of me of many young men advocating that it's not serving them. So I would question that it's having no negative effect. I'm
gonna play a little role here, right? Because I agree with you, by the way. So first of all, I agree with you to play slight devil's advocate to that. If they can't categorically prove that there is a neurological effect on men from watching porn, you could put it down to something like the opposite of a healthy user bias, the unhealthy user bias. If someone is consumed in porn, they probably have a poor lifestyle, probably have a poor diet, probably don't train. Therefore, maybe their erectile dysfunction came from that. Maybe their lack of energy came from that. That's a possible claim, I suppose. However, I don't really subscribe to that model.
Yeah.
And with young men getting consumed by porn, there is an interesting concept, and I think maybe it was, I know it comes up a lot on like different podcasts. I think the last one I heard was Chris Williamson talking about this idea of it tends to be the story you tell yourself around the thing that you are doing. So again, I talk about intent sometimes. What is your intent? So if the story you tell yourself around something like food or porn or phone use is very positive, you tend to have more positive outcomes.
Okay.
So could it be that maybe the porn is having an effect, but it's the story that men are telling themselves around the porn and the narrative that they create about relationships and romance and themselves and comparison and all of that kind of stuff is what's actually having the negative effect on them. At the end of the day, I don't really think it matters. So that's my devil's advocate thing gone. I do think there's a net negative to overconsumption of insert thing here.
I think just like, because I'm an evidence-based practitioner. Yes. I love evidence. To think about the concept of what porn is, you're masturbating over two strangers having sex.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's quite unhealthy in any shape or form. I don't think we need to deep dive into needing to look at the neurological negative impact. I'm like, if you're seeking social connection but having to masturbate, how lonely is that experience? So I think sometimes we need this evidence, or what does it, I'm like, open our eyes, and I think it's obvious that it's not a behavior. And absolutely, there's a lot of negative behaviors that we can engage in, and we can reframe it as a positive one, and maybe a learning experience of what sex is. But I think in general, if you're seeking, we are here for two reasons, I believe: to be authentically ourselves and to socially connect. And I think that is a massive driver in disconnecting us from people. So for me, there's only negatives that can come from it. Anyone that I know that has reverted away from it, their lives have improved. And that's from my own clinical experience. So that would be the evidence that I would see. But here's my bro science approach to it as well, because I love the bro science, right? If you combine everything you've just said there with everything that I would feel is right, which is my bro science coming in, with the likes of people like Andrew Huberman, who would talk about a retraining of what you find sexually arousing. So there's some science there as well, which is not necessarily to say that it's directly causing health issues, but it's a reframing of what you find arousing, which from my perspective is not healthy as well, because now you're more aroused by watching rather than pursuing a partner or engaging in all of the things that would lead to a romantic encounter, like having social skills or becoming a better person or becoming desirable yourself and actually competent and confident. For me, it's a complete net negative. Yeah. The same as everything else that you are completely addicted to or consumed by. So I think this is one thing. I don't think it is an evil thing, but I think it's a thing that is designed specifically to capture a drive, and you take that drive and point it at porn, and it's not driven at anything else in your life. So for me, that's when my bro science goes. If your man says to me that there's no science pointing to this, I'm like, okay, but step out of that world for 1 second, because it's such an easy game to play to tell me that you're a scientist and I don't understand the science. I'm going to step right out of your world. So now we're playing by world rules, and say if I look at this as a net sum game, it's net negative. Yeah. Because of all these different reasons. Yeah. And many of them you're never going to be able to prove or disprove. Absolutely. So we have to trust Dan's bro science on the Prymal podcast. I'll trust it. This is very comfortable. And it makes, all of what you were saying, it just makes perfect sense. Yeah. If we're replacing any of our behavior and it's pulling us away from human connection, any opportunity, like to get aroused sexually, that our step is to open our mobile phone and to put up our search engine rather than putting our hands on our partner or to feel the touch of a human being. But they're the steps that we are now getting aroused and preparing ourselves to ejaculate. That, for me, it's we're just so disconnected, and it can be easier. And if you are lonely, these are strategies that can be used. Are they beneficial? I don't feel they are. And I don't feel they are. And I would have listened to a little bit of talks if some people speak about it, whether it be TED Talks or some sex specialists as well. And they would have before advocated, and there was one on Steve Bartlett, and she would have expressed before I would have advocated that people sit with their partner and watch porn. And she's like, and now seeing how things are going, and maybe the evidence that she looked at, she's like, I wouldn't be recommending that. This is where I would be guiding couples down. So yeah, I think anything that will pull you away from human connection inherently will be negative. If we're replacing it, like, because we're drawn towards being connected. We want to be connected, whatever that looks like. If you're an introvert, even young people who have autism would have difficulty in social situations. Inherently, they want to seek connection, like in whatever shape that looks like. So I think pull that away from somebody and only bad things can happen.
And I didn't intend this to be a porn-focused episode, but just to make another point on that, because it's a conversation I had recently with somebody about intimacy work and these workshops. And again, something I'm not particularly familiar with at all, but it was an interesting concept for me, these intimacy workshops where people were encouraged to explore their own mind and the fabric of their own mind when it comes to intimacy and connection with their partner. And the vast majority of us tend to have absolutely no understanding of what that means or how to ask for what we want in a relationship or how to actually connect with our partner. So if the advice is to use porn to bring a deeper connection, most of us are only doing that because it's way more difficult to generate an actual connection. So again, it's pulling you further away for what could be a positive outcome for you and a partner. So yeah, I mean, the more you go into it, the deeper you go. I'm not suggesting everyone has to go and do intimacy workshops, but usually there is lower hanging or more impactful and meaningful fruit than the quick fix dopamine. That tends to be just a rule of thumb.
I think, like how you reference it there, we're drawn towards the easier option as well, and that's where a natural human behavior will be drawn towards the easier, and the easier is almost never the right way to go. We have to, rather than asking the questions from our partner, what are you seeking, what you want, what feels good for you, and seek that eye contact and that human touch, human connection, or advocate our own needs. Sometimes we don't know them ourselves. Sometimes we're too ashamed. Sometimes it's just easier to click a search and look up whatever you want and get that. But it will disconnect you from connection with your partner. And I would seen a lot of people come out and say that their connection with their partners have never been stronger when they've removed porn from their lives. That's what they would have said. Things have just improved massively, that it just took touch, them walking past. And I was more drawn towards it, they would say, and it just felt right. And yeah, it just, things only improved when they removed it, rather than, I didn't see any negative effects of anyone removing porn. And
in your experience, both as a practitioner and a human being with friends and family and stuff like that, how common do you think that particular issue is? And abuse?
Very common, and the problem is we can shy away from the words abusive, negative, when it's a behaviour that we want to engage in, and it can be looked at as quite soft. And then if they are drawn towards and they hear that guy say there's no negative impacts, then they're jumping on it because it's an easier solution. So I think it's just opening up the conversations, having the chats about it. I think it's very common. If I speak to a lot of young men, there's only a cohort of them that say, no, that wasn't for me. I felt lonely, I disconnected, I stopped having sex with my partner. Men my age that are in relationships for a long time. And they just said that they had to come away from it. It was just a rabbit hole. And they would say that what was mainstream before that doesn't exist anymore. It's all aggressive. So they're looking at what appears to be violent attacks nearly. And it's just like, how am I getting aroused? They're so fearful of it. And so they'd be the ones. But I think it's okay to attach these negative words to it to help people if they are questioning it and want to come away from it, to come away. But I think it's one of those behaviours that are socially acceptable. So
and it requires quite a level of self-awareness to realise that this is the thing, because that's not giving. Maybe it's giving me the dopamine hit, but it's not giving me a deeper level of fulfilment.
Yeah.
To be able to recognise that requires either help or a level of self-awareness.
Yeah.
And then when we shift that age bracket away from men in their 30s and 40s to men in their teens and early 20s, that self-awareness isn't there. So what chance have they got?
Absolutely.
Which is a scary thing.
Yeah, because we're very lucky lucky if it does exist in a man that's 35 or 40 and they were like, they can see it's a negative thing, but young men find that very difficult, that reflection piece.
Yeah, for sure. What are some of the other maladaptive behaviours you've come across?
So I would see drug use a lot. And it's really just trying to soothe pain. And when you open up, and as I said, Gabor would always ask, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. So when we really open up with these young people of what's going on for them, it's their suffering, their existence in their own bodies is a struggle. So if they have experienced trauma or for whatever reason, they don't feel safe within themselves, they don't trust themselves, there's nothing about themselves that they love. And to soothe that and to make that go away for a moment, they use drugs, and it makes them feel good for that moment. And then that negative circle then starts, that causes pain, and then we're back to seeking more of that to soothe it. So I would see drugs time and time again, and depending on the type of experience that they're looking for, if they are disassociated, sometimes they're seeking those amphetamines to get that lift, and vice versa. If they are hypervigilant and they want to be soothed, sometimes they're looking for those opiates or cannabis to soothe themselves and to calm. So yeah, drug use would be very common feature, I would see, of maladaptive behaviour. It's very accessible. If they can't access mental health supports or they don't want to, this is an option that's available at every street corner for them. It's very easy to access narcotics. So I think that's why they drift towards it. And it immediately fixes. If you're to really think about moments of your own life where you've suffered, whether it's emotional pain or physical pain, and that there's an answer right there, or you can go on a 12-week waiting list, you can see why people would drift towards the immediate fix.
Also, I mean, environmental factors are huge. A lot of people don't know that such a thing exists as a waiting list or a HSC or someone to help.
Absolutely.
They've just grown up surrounded by this environment, and this is the norm, and this is what you do because dad did it or mom did it or
absolutely
or my brother did it or whatever. Do you, and I'm not asking you to compromise yourself professionally here, but in your opinion, do you think there are any situations where drug use is not unhealthy or maladaptive?
I think before you remove this maladaptive behaviour, you really need to question, is it the right move right now? So absolutely, is them smoking cannabis keeping them alive? This maladaptive behaviour has served them and probably to keep them alive. So before you go in there and just look at the drug and want to end the addiction, you really need to unpack the pain. So we can go in with the legislation saying this is the wrong thing, you're doing the wrong thing, you need to remove that. But the reality is we need to really understand that this is a coping strategy that's helped them stay alive. So absolutely, has it served them? 100%. Has it kept them alive? In many cases, yes. So how do we look at dissolving the pain before removing the maladaptive behaviour straight away? So yeah, that might be controversial, and people might say, you need to remove the drug straight away. But I think if you target it like that, we're just going to go back to an addictive need.
And I suppose the reason I asked the question is because it's another similar answer. It's an intent in the story you tell yourself. It's not, the drug isn't the problem, it's the pain.
It's the pain.
The addiction isn't the problem, it's the pain. So the other part of the question that I was asking there was, if I decided to use drugs, because I've used substances before, like psychedelics and things like that, but my intent is completely different. The place I used them from was completely different. I wasn't trying to escape or cover pain. For example, alcohol is a drug that we use to cover and escape from pain. As much as people don't like to hear that because it's socially acceptable, and it's I don't have a problem with alcohol. I don't have a problem with people drinking alcohol. But I'm very, very careful around this idea of using alcohol to cover up your pain. Even if your pain is, I hate my job. That's enough. That's pain. That's 50 hours a week, every day of your life that you're doing something. That's identity issues. That's all sorts of stuff. And alcohol could be the thing that helps you manage that. That's not a good story to tell yourself around alcohol. But usually you're telling yourself the story. It's for the crack, it's for the lads, it's for the parties, for all. Fine. But again, for me, it's not about the drug. It's about the pain. It's about the why. It's about the intent. And once you have a good handle on that and self-awareness around that, then everything is game ball. I'm not saying anything about do heroin now because you're a Buddhist monk and you feel great. You probably wouldn't if you were that much in connection with yourself. But yeah, again, it's to try and stop focusing on, we got to get rid of the drugs. We got to get rid of the drugs. It's the drugs. They're definitely a problem, and there's the problem around the criminality element of all that, and it creates a whole other subculture of antisocial behaviour and things like that. But it's not the problem. The problem is what's happening inside that person who needs the drug, and that's pain.
Yeah, there's so many interesting points that you said there. Just like, so the psychedelic side, like for people, if your intent to engage in psychedelics is to, you know, unpack what's going on for you and get a deeper knowledge into yourself. I'm not advocating that people go out and take psychedelics, but the intent in that situation can be really beneficial for people. And there's a lot of research on psychedelics at the moment. I'm not going to get into it too much, but Gabor does fantastic. He speaks about it in a really in-depth way. People don't tend to do that for a soothing. Some people do because they just think it's a weekend away on ayahuasca. And I think if that's the weekend you want, I'd say just, you know,
but that's another form of escapism for some people.
It is.
It's another problem with plant medicines, yeah.
If every second weekend you're going off to shaman and you're going off taking ayahuasca and you're having the best, or you think that that's the path you're going, and you're already planning the next one before you finish that one, I think that's the wrong approach. But for some people, it really helps them get rid of the barriers that we can put up in front of ourselves to make ourselves believe this is why we act in a certain way. And I think it can dismantle them. So I think that's one side. The alcohol side, I have my own opinion on alcohol. I haven't drank alcohol in maybe 16, 17 years now. And I think where it's really important, the language that we use. And when it comes to the lads that are like, I'm treating myself to pints, I'm heading out to have a treat, we really need to shift that. They're treating themselves to ingesting something that's going to inherently make them feel terrible for a few days. That's going to, if they're in training or they've got that kind of progress happening, it's going to diminish all the hard graft that they've put in that week. It's going to make them disconnected from their family because they're hungover, they won't have the ability. It's going to make them want to ingest more things that aren't good for them, like a takeaway the next day. I can't move. It really is a punishment on the body. And I think a lot of men won't want to say because it quenches pain, and whether that is they work all week or for some people who are out and they find socializing really difficult, it's a fantastic social lubricant. It'll make you feel, it'll get rid of your inhibitions, your worries, it can loosen you up. But I think if you're uncomfortable in that environment, you should sit with it, ask why you're uncomfortable. Is it the right environment for you to be sitting in? If not, is there something else that you can be doing to make yourself feel better? I hear that conversation. I had a really good conversation with a guy recently in the gym. We went to the sauna and we were talking, and he would have expressed the same. He was like, I work so hard all week and I watch what I eat and I go to the gym and I eat very carefully so I can have my pints. And he said, I need that. And that's my salvage. And he's like, what do you do? Because I was like, I'm also an entrepreneur, I work for myself and work is stressful. But there's no part of that is going to make me feel better about my week. It'll take away my time. It'll make me feel worse. It'll make my decision making worse. Like if you can shift your language to, I'm going to treat myself to a gym session. I'm going to treat myself to good food. I'm going to treat myself to a good night's sleep. You tend to be drawn towards this positive behavior and seeing it for what it is. Like we treat ourselves to chocolate. We treat ourselves to alcohol. We treat ourselves to not going to the gym. We'll just treat ourselves. I'll just relax now. Like this is not treating our bodies with what it actually needs. So I think we need to reframe the language of treat. Like, and I'm very cautious of this with my own daughter when it comes to, can I have a treat? I'm like, here's a strawberry. She's like, that's not a treat. I'm like, no, that is a treat. Here. She's so like, I was like, if you want sugar, for sure you can have that. But like, this is actually what we should be treating ourselves to, all of this good stuff. Like you'll feel better. So I think alcohol is very much the same. Very careful with our language. And our language will dictate a lot of our behavior. It'll make it socially acceptable. So yeah, I'd be cautious on the alcohol side as well. For a lot of young men who are looking for that escape, inherently they're going to feel worse afterwards. And there's other ways for them to make themselves feel better. That isn't true a substance.
Which we will most certainly get to. We will most certainly get to that because it's a cornerstone of what we're going to talk about today. So we have drugs, including alcohol. Mm-hmm. We have the porn. Mm-hmm. Anything else cropping up in terms of common kind of things you would notice with people?
I think struggling with, so mobile phone used to be one, and a lot of young men struggling with their identity, which is probably something we could talk about as well. I think when they don't have an identity or a goal or a shift, and if they're not dedicating their time to something positive, something negative will take their time. And I think it's really good to be conscious of how we are using our time. Like we are very lucky. We're in Ireland. We've got fantastic resources available to us, whether that be education and other opportunities of learning and engaging in different job opportunities. And if And other things like meaningful connections, outdoor spaces. We've all of these. If we don't intentionally use our time for something positive, something negative would intentionally take our time. So I think how we use our time is really something that I would see people using in a negative way. But mobile phone use would be it. Would be
and probably, again, stemming from the same thing. It's easier to reach for the phone, and I know it becomes a compulsion, it becomes an actual addictive behaviour and a habit as well, but it also is allowed to occur because it's easier to reach for the phone than it is to deal with a negative thought or a negative feeling or a negative impulse. And I mean, I'm a great example of this. I am now really aware of when I don't feel good or I get a negative like emotion, my phone and a YouTube video, or YouTube is my go-to. Like and it could be, I would tell myself the story of I'm watching a video on a camera or a mic or a business video or something like that. But it's really what it's doing for me is it's just calming me. It's calming me. But again, net sum, I don't feel great afterwards because it hasn't actually like calmed me. It's just distracted me. So the negative feelings are still there, but now I've usually sat for 20 minutes or an hour and done nothing, and I feel a bit shitter about myself, and then I get up and have a bit of a headache. And anyone who's played computer games when you're younger will recognise that feeling when your mom tells you to get off the computer after 4 hours. You're like, fuck off! It's a version of that, like. So, I can completely relate to that. I can completely understand it. I can completely empathise and sympathise with the compulsive nature of it. I talk to a good friend of mine, Brian, all the time about in work, like the phone can't be within hand's reach. I'm a grown ass man. And I run a business, and I still can't stop reaching for that goddamn phone. So I have to put it somewhere else. Like a baby, I have to put it out of my reach, or I'll take the thing and put it in my mouth. You know what I mean? Same thing, I can't have the chocolate bars on the table anymore because I'll walk in, I'll pick one up. So I'm not this creature of discipline. So for me, it's about creating the environment. But I'm lucky that I have people to hold me accountable, and I'm ensconced in, this is a word I used the other day, Brian had to check me on it, but I'm going to use it again, ensconced in this world of personal development and growth and business and all that kind of stuff. But I'm lucky that I have that. I've constant reminders for myself. Most people don't. So I completely get it. And whenever we're having these conversations, this is not judgment. It's to try and shine a light on this for people. And 99% of people listening right now, it might just wash over them. But there might be one person sitting there going, fuck, yeah. Because that was me. That had happened to me. There was an moment. And there's been many moments since. So I think this conversation is so powerful. With the work that you do you see... The question is not, do you struggle to break through to these people? Because I know you have various techniques, but do you get a positive reaction from people when you highlight this stuff for them? Can you highlight this stuff for them?
I think it's really interesting. There's loads that you were saying there, and that space, like you are disciplined enough that you are putting strategies in place to stop you from doing it. So that's where I see discipline.
I think I put the strategies in place because I don't have the discipline.
But I think if you're disciplined enough to do it, so you're engaging in the behavior that you're supposed to, and that's by putting those strategies in place. So that's what I would say. But I think if I come in at it with a lot of young people or adults that you need to do this and this is going to make your life better, the biggest behavioral change will come where the pain of staying the same is going to be worse than the pain of change. At the moment when you're in a really low space, and I can see that you're on your phone, you're eating bad food and you're up all night, and I say to you, you need to come off your phone, you need to start eating better, and you need to move your body. All of these are hard work. So you're speaking with someone who might have depression or anxiety. I'm asking them to completely change their life and be really uncomfortable when they feel they're already at their capacity and they're just surviving. And I'm asking them to shift everything. So I feel you can do a psychoeducational piece with them, and that means really bringing forward the knowledge, the information, the research. Sometimes that can trigger something. It can go, you know what, that makes sense. But others, and what I find the best foot forward from the lens of an occupational therapist, is finding out what's meaningful for them and getting them doing it. And so starting with that. So when they have all these goals, or I want to do this, I want to do that, I'm like, absolutely. You know, if they have them, amazing, and we'll work towards them. But it's just bringing just joy in the moment and them getting hooked on, okay, so for sure this felt a little bit uncomfortable, but the result was I feel really good about myself now. So it's that direction that I'm always swaying towards. Find what's meaningful for the person, and that's where behavior will change. Otherwise, it can be really difficult. And for all those reasons, these are all coping strategies. They're maladaptive ones, but they're coping strategies that has helped them survive. So and I'm saying you need to scrap all of them because they're nonsense. They're like, but I'm managing. You're right. I haven't left my room. You're right. I do feel like crap all the time, but I'm not dying, and I'm just getting through. So it's about giving them a taste of life. And whatever that is, it's getting them out. And it can be a slow process. But it's usually those conversations, and OTs are fantastic for that side. It's really just talking about what's meaningful for you. What occupations would you like to do? Or if they say, this is my goal, I'm like, these are the basics of how we need to get there. And then they need to see. So if it's like, my goal is to attend a full day at work again, or like, my goal is to be able to go out on a social night, I'm like, right, we need to break down what that looks like, build the resilience that you need to be able to manage that. And then we might just be trialing a few runs of going out to the pub. What does this feel like? Bringing their anxiety levels up and then managing that and talking about different strategies. But it's about the action of the doing. And I mentioned that the last time. That's the greatest success I see, and I know I'm biased within the lens of occupational therapy, but I think it's amazing, and it's about the action of the doing. I'm not saying, and particularly when it comes to trauma, it's a wraparound approach. It's like all of the therapeutic input that they can manage and cope with should be implemented. It's not just OT, but OT I feel is really the driving force in the shift for people to be like, oh, this feels good, because you have to make somebody feel. And I think build evidence for them. And for me, changing paths or even career paths or big shifts in my life, part of me was looking for evidence. When you have that self-doubt or those questions, I just want evidence to say, am I going to be okay? Is this going to be fine? And so I'm trying to develop evidence for them. So I would say that would be, it is slow, it's hard, it's not easy. And then just giving them a taste of that, and always opening up to how have these served you? What is going on for you? What's the pain? What's that like? But really trying to build the evidence as well to say, things, this is the life you could be living.
Yeah. The sad reality, though, as well, with all this is sometimes it doesn't turn around.
It doesn't.
Or people don't get the help.
Yeah.
Or people don't engage. And as you mentioned to me on the phone, like, people end their own lives.
Yeah.
And if the numbers are to be believed, it's becoming more and more common, particularly among men. And you mentioned to me a personal story of your own as well.
Yeah.
So is that something that is becoming more of a part of this journey for you now as well?
I think so, Dan. Yeah, I think I had that conversation with you in recent years. There's been a number of my friends, many fathers, many my own age, who have lost their own lives through drug addiction or through taking their own lives through just struggles, and that's their reality for whatever reason, whatever pain they were feeling, whatever that they couldn't see another way out. It was really hard for them. Maybe lack of services, maybe an inability to think that services could support them, or trying services and it just didn't work for them. So I think for me, a lot of men need to hear that there is hope. There is, and let me hone into hope, and because I think it's a really important. We have to believe that there is an answer. We have to believe that change can come. If you're working with a young person or an adult and they don't have hope or they don't believe change is going to come, you're at a loss. So, and that's them being able to latch on to the future identity of who they could become. So hope is huge. So it's trying to develop that. Evidence will help with that. So I really feel at the moment men are massively struggling. They are really lacking in social connection. They struggle to connect. They struggle to open up. They struggle to open up with their own emotions. They don't know who they are in society at the moment, and that's really hurting them because they've lost that role of like, okay, I thought this is who I should be, or I thought this is who society would want me to be, and now I actually don't know what direction I'm going. So I'm very concerned for men, particularly because I think they're very isolated and they find it really difficult to connect to their emotions and understand that I need help, and who should I ask? When I speak to a lot of these young men and I ask who do they go to, the answer is usually no one, or no one cares, and it's like. And I would speak with young women as well. They would often have someone. That they felt that they could connect with. And I think women in general are fantastic for building those social connections and making sure they have the coffees with their girls and have the chats and men are we're rubbish at it. Absolutely. So I think connection is a huge component of our existence. So if we can connect with people in a positive way, connect people who might be in a journey with us, who are struggling as well, and that we're connecting through doing something that's benefiting our life, whether that be movement, even like Couch to 5K running group, or whether that be having that conversation in the sauna. The sauna over the last few years I've had some of the most in-depth conversation with men that like we just kind of talk about different topics. Sometimes it's addiction, trauma, sometimes it's becoming a workaholic. What does that look like? What are we trying to escape from? And I'm just like, such a beautiful space. All men sitting in there in shorts, just like, and we're doing something that's benefiting our health. We're really connected, or others that we're going out for a run in the morning. And so I think if we can find our tribes, whatever that looks like, but connecting with people who are pushing us in the right direction. And I'm not anti-alcohol, and I think it serves a purpose, but just to be mindful that it's not based around something that's going to make us feel worse as well.
Yeah, very well put. A lot of the stuff that we spoke about earlier on with the maladaptive behaviours, addiction, all that kind of stuff, for me, especially over the last few years, I think about this stuff a lot, talk about it as well, as this idea of identity. I'm always like, what is this? What is this thing, this identity? And then obviously now, as you pointed to there, there's a conversation around masculinity at the moment. There's this idea of a loneliness epidemic among men. The rates of suicide are going up. And also, I must say, like, women have their own struggles. 100%. And my personal belief is the individual struggles of men and women in their own sense of identity are what are leading to a lot of this absolute horseshit social narrative around men and women against each other and in the workplace. And like, it's, for me, it's all bullshit. When people come into me with these political arguments, I'm like, your argument is built on the shadiest, loosest foundations there, because we're not talking about our individual identity and nourishing and supporting that. All we're doing is shouting down the identity of the opposite sex. Men need to be less masculine, and well, women need to be more feminine, and it's all this bullshit. But actually, my opinion lies in, if we were to do our own work and had support doing our own work, those relationships just blossom and flourish. I've experienced that personally in almost every aspect of my life by doing my own work, by stopping looking outwards and starting to try and look a little bit more inwards. And even though, as I always say, I am rubbish at it, I've started and I've noticed results already. So for me, I'm like, right, this is the pathway, this is what I'm doing, I'm going to work on me. And it's where I think when you hear all the messages from the likes of Rogan and Jocko Willink and all these people who are saying, go hard and be, I'm like, yeah, that's an extreme version, but the message is kind of right. Like, do the work, make the bed, work on yourself, and then all the interpersonal stuff kind of just takes care of itself then. So that's my opening statement for the conversation on identity. I do believe that a lot of the pain that we've referred to, and you've spoken about the behaviours and symptoms of addiction and alcohol and all that kind of stuff, my personal belief is it comes from a complete loss of self. If you don't have a solid foundation of who I am and what I am meant to do, or, because I had this conversation the other day, if you don't believe there's something you're meant to do, something you can find meaning in, if you don't have that, of course you're going to feel this kind of deep dark hole inside yourself that you're just going to fill with whatever you can fill it with, be it the alcohol, the porn, the drink, whatever. So I think most, if not all, of our issues in the modern world come from this sense of identity, this poor connection with our sense of who we are. I'll speak more to the male side of things today because I'm a man, I understand men, I don't understand women at all, so I'll speak to the male side of things. If I think about big picture, why we seem to struggle, and I include myself in this and probably yourself as well, why do we seem to struggle as men nowadays? I look at what maybe historically have been the tools that we've used. We spoke earlier about a very, like if we think about our fathers or grandfathers, a very, very clear sense of purpose. Difficult life, but bred some pretty damn good men. So there's a lesson there. They had to get up. They had to work 15, 16 hours at physical jobs in the mines, on the fields. But there was multiple beneficial aspects. You've alluded to them there. Physical work, a sense of direction and purpose, camaraderie. Before that, you were a soldier in the army, and maybe you didn't sort out your individual identity, but you had this shared sense of purpose with all these other men, and you were going out to defend the town, or you were going to capture the lion, or whatever it was. So through that, you could develop a sense of purpose. Maybe it was not your unique individual God-given identity, but it was a sense of purpose. I am here with my brothers. We had initiations, and we had manhood rituals where we learned a lot of these lessons about this is now how you craft yourself into a person who has purpose. And then within that vessel, you can kind of find some more unique bits of yourself, but here's how you build yourself into a man. And again, it was go into the mountains there for 2 days and catch yourself an eagle and all this mad stuff they do. But it wasn't necessarily the thing. It was, this is now a step towards being a man. And we as grown men in the tribe are going to help you on that journey. What do we have today? Fuck all. Nothing. Like, we have the pub and we have sports, but most of us aren't actually engaged in the, like, sports. Most people follow sports, but don't play any sports. Most people. Some people, like, people think I'm ridiculous now, 35, playing Gaelic football. I was laughing the other day because the Dubs obviously won the All-Ireland up the Dubs. And the commentator kept talking about 40-year-old Stephen Cluxton, 40-year-old Stephen Cluxton, but they're banging on about his age here a lot. But unless as we get into our 30s and 40s, you are, like, particularly dedicated to a particular sport, most of us do nothing. Maybe a bit of five-a-side every now and again. But what do we have to lean on then? The pub, as you alluded to. That's why it becomes so popular. And then it comes along with this nice sedative that we can take to ease the pain, and all the other lads are doing it. So it's socially acceptable. But there's no real positive outcome on the other side of that. So that's why I personally believe the symptoms of this is we get a lot of men who struggle. We got a lot of men who unfortunately end their lives because they don't see a way out. We get a lot of men who go a really, really bad, or not a lot, some men who go a bad direction and become predatory and become a danger to society because they've no other way of directing or harnessing that energy. But all of that for me is downstream of identity. So that's my little speech on identity there. But I the reason I think it's so important is because, as I said, all of these other things aren't necessarily the problem. They're symptoms and outcomes of this lack of identity. And for me, and we'll discuss some of the practical things we can do, but for me, on a conceptual level, trying to really embrace the fact that if you have a sense of meaning and purpose, it doesn't have to be a thing. It could be anything that you can find some meaning in. If you don't have that, you are going to struggle. And not only that, if you don't take some time to figure out if you have that, like maybe you do a job you don't particularly like, but maybe you could find purpose in that job. Unless you stop and think about it though, you probably never will. So you'll hate the job and you'll want to do something else to make up for the fact that you hate your job. Relationships the same. Everything for me is the same. So like it's hopefully listening to conversations like this, because this is what did it for me. Listening to this, at some point it clicked in my head. I was like, this is not an original idea from me. At some point somebody said something that I was like, oh, fuck. And now all I want to do is sit down with people like yourself. Because I laugh because, like, before we turn these mics on, I say this a lot, but we actually just sit here and we're buzzing, talking about the same stuff that we talk about on the podcast. So it's not like we've designed this for the show. This is the stuff that I literally crave, because for me, it gives me more purpose and identity. And then what do? I become a better dad. I become a better partner. I become a better friend. I become a better version in my own head of myself, and I've better self-talk. And it's like tiny bits, but it's all this direction now instead of that direction. So for me, that's massive. It's everything for me.
Just heavy. I can feel, I'm emotional hearing you speak. That's
yeah,
great. Like,
thanks for listening.
Yeah, no, honestly, and just that, like, aligning with doing things that are meaningful to you and how much of a positive impact that's having on your relationships, your connection, which instills a further meaning in your life. I don't know where to. There's so much. So let's start with, like, finding our own identity and our purpose. To touch on somebody who's been impacted by trauma, they don't trust themselves to make the right decisions. Their decisions haven't served them well. So they're looking at evidence going like, I haven't made the right decisions. I don't know what I'm doing. I internally don't trust myself. I don't trust people. So they're very, very disconnected from who they actually are. They don't know, and they don't believe the things that are coming up because their behavior doesn't make sense to them either. So I think it's very hard for someone who's traumatized to really try to find out who they are and really start trusting their decisions. So that's a huge hurdle. When you were referencing back years ago and men working at absolutely everything you were saying, it was like that movement piece. You don't have to find meaning in your job. You have to find meaning in your life. And if your job is working in Tesco and you get to go home and have that holiday with your family, or you have a 20-hour job a week and you get more time to connect with people that you love, it doesn't matter about the job. It's are you finding meaning in your life, in your everyday? I think there's only a very small percentage of us that are lucky enough. You're one of them. I'm one of them that has found their role and going, this is exactly where I need to be. I think there's a lot of people, I say 99% of people aren't in that position. Unfortunately, I think they can find it, but I think if they can find that job that they're like, this is my dream job, this is exactly what I should be doing. How do you find meaning in your everyday? And what are you doing to try to look for that? So yeah, there's loads of what you said there. I was like, and it's to look at the roles that men would have had in the past, that they were like, this is what I do, and this is where, I'm not saying that there wasn't mental health issues in the past, but movement was a huge part of it. We are very disconnected. I see a very stagnant society, and like you're speaking about playing five-a-side, you're one of the few of men that of your age that is engaging in, first of all, a connection, a sport with other people, but play, joy, something that brings a bit of a giggle and a laugh. There's very few men that are doing those things, very few. So I think having those will be really positive impact on your mental health, because you're going to be connecting with people, your peers, and enjoying that space. But I think, how do you find meaning? What does meaning look like to you? And it can look very different. And when we're pushed into a certain role, like whether it is an over masculine or an over feminine role, and it isn't who we are, that's where we will struggle. Because I think some men want to find the feminine role. And I can say in my life, there's aspects of my life that are quite masculine and aspects of my life that are quite feminine. I work with kids. I work in healthcare. I'm interested in psychology. I'm interested in people. They're very feminine attributes. But I love feeling like a provider, feeling like a dad, doing hard graft, doing tough work, tough exercise. That also makes me feel really good. So it's very conflicting in one sense. I don't just fit into a criteria of engineering and this is what I do. I just like machines. I don't want to deal with people. I'm completely the other way around. So, but I'm proud in each space, each hat that I put on. I think some men struggle to be proud, and it depends on their environment. I think the greatest thing for us to really discover who we are is to be uprooted from our immediate environment and lifted and put somewhere else. If that means moving to a different county or moving to a different country or breaking away from the circle of our friends, if we're looking around and we're not happy and our environment isn't serving us and we're trying to discover who we actually are, get up and leave and move. It isn't that hard. For me, I spent 5 years outside of Ireland traveling. I've been to 50 different countries.
50?
Yeah. Had loads of loads of amazing, unique experiences, and every single one of them helped me understand myself more and more and more by meeting different people, different cultures. And one of the biggest factors in that is I wasn't who I was when I was in my hometown of Shannon. I wasn't Podge, how I was identified back then.
Shall we call it Podge?
No, Padraig's fine. Podge is, my sister, my nephews, my mom calls me Podge. I always know if it's cousins or my family. When I hear Podge, I'm like, that's that life. Cork, it's like Padraig, the professional. But so I started introducing myself as the person I wanted to be and the person who I believed I was. So every time I put my hand forward, it's like, hi, my name is Padraig. I am this, not I am this person who was in my hometown who might have up to no good or done whatever. It's like, I'm Paul. So every environment, I really helped shape who I was because I was putting my identity forward, who I was, not who people believed I was. So you really start finding out who exactly you are because you're identifying it every time you meet somebody. So
what were some of the things you would say?
I'm class.
I'm Podge and I'm class.
Rather than it being specific parts of my personality, it would be the conversation that I could lean into and then hearing feedback of what people believed I was or the type of interaction or how they felt with all of these interactions. And it was all really positive. So it was a series of really positive back and forth connections with different people. And that made me feel really good. And it just made me feel like this is where I needed to be. Like that was the discovery for me wanting to work with people was like I had worked in building sites for years prior to getting into healthcare. And it was connecting with people. And that happened when I was abroad. I would be very surprised if I stayed in Shannon. I'd be very surprised if I was still alive or if I had good health, if that was my path. I left Shannon when I was 19 and started traveling. But I think I would be very surprised if this is where I wouldn't be surprised. It would be absolutely impossible for me to be sitting here having a podcast with you if that was where I'd stayed. I had to change my environment to become who I was, who's the man I'm sitting in front of.
Wow.
So that would be, for me, there was a big shift, but it was lifting from my environment. That environment didn't serve me, and for many of my friends it didn't serve, and unfortunately it took their lives. So I think you have to get up. And so if you don't feel good, it isn't that scary. People are frightened of, but I can change or I don't. What's scarier is staying the same.
Yeah, and I can speak to that as well, and I that really resonates with me. But there's a lot of people also who, one, don't know that is an option. Like I often think when you don't feel good, it's not that you know that there's this thing you can do. Sometimes you're not even aware that something exists outside of how you feel right now, because it consumes you. It becomes, as we said earlier on, your identity. Pain is my identity, or self-hate or shame or whatever. This is my identity now. So being able to kind of logically or consciously think, you know what, if I get up now and I go and visit 50 countries and that'll change, or move down the road, that'll really do this for me. And even if someone says it to you, like you said earlier on, for you to say, my environment is probably where I find that false sense of comfort as well, because it's where maybe I have access to the maladaptive behaviours, the drugs, the whatever it might be. I can get all that stuff here. It's familiar to me, and the unfamiliar is even more fear that'll add to this kind of melting pot. I used to not that I wasn't sensitive to the issue, I didn't give a lot of thought to the environment and how it affected other people who I viewed as maybe less than in society. So people who were robbing or stealing or hurting or dealing or all this kind of stuff. I didn't have a lot of empathy or time for them. And I'm not saying now that I condone the behaviour. The behaviour for me, there's a line. When you cross the line, society has to intervene, and there's consequences. But I'm a lot more understanding now, and Jill is a big part of that because she worked in a lot of underprivileged areas, and she was basically saying, like, you'd have somebody, their entire life was drugs and drink and bad nutrition and no movement and abusive parents, and their brothers got into drugs, and what the hell else is that kid going to do? Like, there is no chance. And on a spectrum, we're all kind of the same. We're products of whatever we grew up with. And coming back to that lovely trauma word, if our parents have dealt with stuff or are not dealing with stuff, if our environment is poor, if our friends are not, the people we fall in with are not necessarily conducive to us, we're going to have negative outcomes. And sometimes it's very hard to be able to see, if I change this environment, I'll change my outcome. So having conversations like this, I feel we will be the ones to have the impact, because I'm sure if someone listening in one of these underprivileged areas now, if they happened to somehow hear this podcast, it probably wouldn't really hit home for them to be like, who the fuck are these two lads with nice jobs and driving around their cars and healthy families, and who are these guys to tell me? But like, you've had your pain, I've had my pain, so we've had a taste, we have an understanding. But we also want to make sure that everybody we touch gets some form of this as well, so that they can create an environment, and hopefully that would spread. That would be my hope with this kind of stuff anyway. I suppose that's why you do the work you do.
Yeah.
Would that be fair?
Yeah. And I agree. I think it's about, if somebody does listen and they're thinking maybe this is the option, and you're right. I've heard that people say, but you're privileged with your mindset. So while I wasn't brought up in the lower socioeconomic area, I left. My school attendance was very poor from 12, 13, kind of left school very young. Wasn't for me. And people say, but you have a privileged mindset. So while you didn't come from a privileged area, your mindset has been to trigger this. So while I feel very lucky with my mindset, because I was in an environment where people weren't heading that direction. They weren't thinking, oh, I'm going to go travel or I'm going to do this. But there was something in me that always wanted more. And I leaned into whatever good adult was there at that time, and I have one good adult that I went back years later and just thanked. I was at a job when I was 15. I was useless, I was scattered, I was all over the place, things weren't good for me, I was just finished school, but she saw something in me, and it was her lens on me, and I was like, if she believes I could be somebody, maybe I could. And it's those moments. So I would really encourage adults, when they're engaging with young people, if you see something in them and you think there could be somebody, you just say it to them. Don't leave the moment pass. They're hungry for it, and a little bit of praise, and I mean authentically say it. If you see someone and you don't see that they could have a future, don't say it. Don't be disingenuous. Be genuine, because they'll read it. And so I think it's a really powerful tool to use. And I feel I have a beautiful life. I feel extremely happy. I'm doing a job that I love. I have a healthy, beautiful daughter. I've got to travel the world. I feel really lucky. That wasn't the path that I was supposed to live, and so I'm very grateful that this is the path that I'm on. but it also shows that there is another way, there is another answer. You can see more, you can want more, you can be curious. And just that self-belief and that identity, I believed that I was going to be more, even though nothing about my upbringing said it, nothing about my school environment. I was failing massively. I had dyslexia, undiagnosed. I really struggled. Couldn't really read properly. Life was really tough. But there was a part of me that said, nah, there's more out there. So latching onto a positive identity that there is a chance, there is hope, will be one of the strongest tools that will make you lean into that environment. It'll make you go, there is an option, because there's always options there. When your eyes are open to them and you believe that you could walk through the door, you'll see the door. If you don't believe that could be your life, you'll never open the door, because people will come and go in your life and give you some opportunities or say a little, and just latch onto it, grab it. I'm not a believer that the universe will come and give you your life. I don't believe that at all. I believe when we have a real clear goal and clear identity, that when the universe is presented to us, we push doors down and we open the doors and we fight for it and we go after it. I don't believe that I'm going to sit at home and want a good life, and a good life is going to knock on the door and say, come on, it's this way.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. You have to see it, and then your eyes are drawn towards the opportunities.
Really interesting that you make that point today of all days. This morning, we're recording this on a Tuesday, Wednesday. This morning, I released a podcast, the one I recorded with Brian, speaking about this idea of purpose and meaning. And that was how I visualize it as well. There's opportunity everywhere, but we're blind to it.
Yeah.
And we need somehow to develop the skills to be able to see it. And then it's the same opportunities, but then we can take control. A few lovely points you made there. I'm actually going to use, slight caveat, a podcast I'm listening to at the moment. I'm not sure if you've heard it, The Witness. Have you heard this?
No.
So very interesting. Someone recommended that I listen to this podcast. I don't usually listen to these kind of crime documentary style podcasts, but this is essentially, I won't ruin it, but it's essentially about a young Irish guy from Ballymun, if I'm not mistaken, who gets caught up in a very bad world, and he becomes part of a kind of a violent drug gang and ends up becoming a witness to a crime. And it's him. It's actually him being interviewed in it. So you're hearing this guy tell his story: abuse, misdirection, being taken advantage of, all these different things, which transpires in him becoming a part of this criminal world through no fault of his own. He was completely taken advantage of. And to hear him tell the story, it's actually really heart-wrenching to hear him talk about this and how he got completely consumed by this world and abused. But from the outside, he is the type of person that you would look at walking in and going, look at your man. Stay away from your man. He's a piece of work there, without any appreciation for his story. Now, again, there's a line. If you crossed your line and made your family unsafe, there's a line there. But there's a reason why he's there. And this podcast just really gives you a deeper understanding of the stories behind these people, and like his complete lack of any autonomy over the stories he tells himself or the identity he builds for himself, because it's been taken advantage of. So the reason I think it's interesting based on the story you just told there is because you could take that same person and tell him a positive story, and all of a sudden he's starting to see the doors, he's starting to see the opportunity, he's starting to believe, and that could completely transform his life, your life, society as we know it.
Absolutely.
And Jill has often mentioned that phrase you spoke to me there, one good adult.
There's huge research in it.
It doesn't have to be a mother or father, one good adult to tell you the story, to implant the seed in you as a young Padraig that this is what you can do. And against everything that your environment would suggest, you managed to take a slightly different path, and that just set you off on your journey. And now you're sitting here in front of me today talking about this stuff with all the wealth of experience you have. So that's how powerful this could be. It's also one of the reasons I love podcasts, because this could be the story or the one thing that you could be that one good adult for somebody listening to this podcast right now. Even another adult listening to this podcast right now, their inner child could hear you speaking, and that could be what they need. Because you know what, Padraig said this thing on this podcast, because that was, for me, that happened as well. I can't remember if there was one specific thing, but it was listening to people speak in a certain way let me know that I could be this person. And I could do these things, and I was like, "Fuck, I'm leaning into this," and it come completely off course to where I was in medical world, and I just went off on this. But it took somebody having a conversation for me to absorb that information and go.
Yeah.
So like I just think that podcast I'm listening to now it's so interesting. And the other point which ties in with earlier on, just to completely sidetrack us and bring us back to the drugs thing, is he was talking about because you mentioned drugs are so widely available, they're everywhere. I think people think this is an other people problem. This is fucking everywhere. And this kid was saying he used to deliver drugs in the milk van. The whole thing is about the milkman and posting in heroin and coke through people's doors. And he was describing like all of the upper class areas that he would be going around to, and women in their like fur dressing gowns picking up the package of coke or heroin from with their milk like in the mornings. And he was like, it was everybody was buying shit. Everybody. Which to me doesn't suggest we have a broken society because there's drugs everywhere. It suggests that so many people are struggling with everything that you talked about there. It's not the underprivileged socioeconomic areas. Like, there's pain everywhere. And where there's pain, there's addiction and there's problems.
Absolutely.
So like all of that, as you're speaking, it's all tied in. I was like, Jesus, that podcast actually illustrates a lot of this stuff. Hearing this kid talk about it, a lot of this stuff around identity and drugs and addiction and problems, and one good adult. And he had one bad adult. And that one bad adult shaped his entire life. So yeah, very, very interesting to hear that. To move on to a slightly funner topic, why is Andrew Tate changing the world? To put you on the spot. No, it's linked very directly with what we just spoke about with identity.
I think there's a lot of men that are seeking identity. I have a lot of men coming in to me, and when I hear the word matrix coming from their mouths, I'm like, I know the direction that they're on, and I think we spoke about it earlier. They're seeking guidance. They're looking for a positive role model, and they're drawn towards him. And he can throw out one or two sentences that make perfect sense. Work hard, do this is the result. And then they're kind of getting lost in the whole concept of the matrix, and a fast cash that is like an incredible amount. So they're drawn towards the rock star lifestyle. He looks good, tattoos, big guy, speaks about smoking cigars, doing whatever he wants, private jets. So people are drawn to the fantasy because he's a real person as well. It's not just a movie star, and he's living a movie star life. So I think people are drawn to him. But I think there's a lot of young men that are just lost. They want guidance, and they're bypassing some really positive influences. Like for me, Andrew Huberman, when I hear there's like my feed is drowned with Andrew Tate, and I'm not drawn towards that material at all. It didn't matter. It was coming into my YouTube feed anyway.
Up until the last year, when they've just completely cancelled everything.
Yeah, there's a massive, there has been a massive shift, but I couldn't understand it because it isn't the content to be all psychology and trauma, and then he just started coming. But people were so drawn to his material, and then about, treat women this way, fuck this, fuck that. And then Andrew Huberman was speaking about research around women, and it was a beautiful clip. And he was like, but this is what women are saying that they want. They're seeking kindness and they're seeking love. And it was just bypassed from drivel of aggression, and because Andrew Huberman isn't driving, doesn't have his top off, it's tattoos, and they weren't really.
He's actually covered in tattoos.
He is always with the shirt to tie down.
Yeah.
But he when I saw that, I was like, how are we missing a very positive influence where he's speaking about the research of what women are actually seeking, and we're drowned with this nonsense. So yeah, I think a lot of men are looking for guidance. They're seeing the 36, 37-year-old Andrew Tate, and they want to be him right now. And he has had his struggles. He has worked hard. He has obviously some level of intelligence and work ethic. So I think people are drawn towards the end result, and not realizing that maybe he had to do A, B, C, and D to become that. They want the fast cars now, the Matrix.
Yourself and James made this point before we started recording here, and I was like, I don't know why I've never actually thought about that before. It's brilliant. Could you just flesh that out just a little bit there? Because you were speaking about he is 37, he's talking about this lifestyle and the Bugattis and all this kind of stuff. But he actually is somebody who has achieved, before all of this fame, a lot of things in his life. He's done a lot of graft.
Is he 4 times world champion kickboxer? Like, what has that taken for him to sacrifice, to commit to that level of training and discipline and resilience, to work that hard? And then you have an 18-year-old that their mother is cutting the crust off their sandwiches, and they have to clean their room for them, and they want all of this without being willing to do anything except watch a video. Yeah. They want want the end result without having the work ethic or the resilience or the hardship. Or you speak about the Tate brothers having, for one of their birthdays, that they go and they have KFC, and because of the struggles of what it was like for them for years, having to go to KFC and take the leftover chicken that was left, and they would, like when people would get up and they'd leave their bucket behind it, they would go and get the chicken, peel all off the chicken, cut it off, put it in the freezer, and that was their protein that they used to survive on when they were struggling. Like that was the life that they lived and the hard graft. And it sounds like I'm celebrating or praising.
I was just going to say.
Yeah. I'm not, by the way. But that's like when you look at all of the path that they went on to be where they are, and I don't praise what they represent at the moment because it's alcohol, cigar smoking and prison. So none of those things are my cup of tea. Like I'm about meaning in life and connection and social connection and things that are really important. And they do represent it with their brotherhood or their love for each other. But yeah, so I think people are seeking the end result, inequipped to do any of the hard graft to get them there. They just want that because it seems cool and easy, but without much understanding of what it might take to get there.
I think that is a really fantastic point, and I really like. I was like, wow, that's a great point when you said earlier on. A couple of follow-up points on the Tate stuff. This is not a celebration of I don't know these people personally, but it's not a celebration of what I heard a very good comment recently from, I think it was Sam Harris, who said that yes, maybe a lot of the stuff they're saying resonates for the reason we talked about, because you have an 18-year-old at home who wants all of the things they're saying, and some of the words they say make sense, like work hard. But there's two issues with that. Number one, it's not coming from a place of compassion with the Tate brothers. And again, it was my opinion, but it's not original opinion. Sam Harris said it, and I was like, that makes a lot of sense. It's not coming from a place of compassion. It seems to be coming from a place of fuck you, get this done, be like me. This is I'll take what I want, and you should take what you want too. It's not about this is a good way to live, this is going to make you a better person. It's not coming from that space. Whereas maybe if you listen to some of the earlier Peterson stuff, it seems very obvious that he's compassionate towards the people, usually young men, that he seems to be talking to. There's a difference in where the message comes from, and that affects the message. And the second thing is, I believe that these guys are fully aware that the 18-year-old kid doesn't have any of the skills, but they're using these headlines to get them to buy the courses and to go and to build this massive audience of people who are Tate worshippers, fully understanding that most of these people don't have the skills that those two guys, to be fair to them, have and built their empire on. Most people don't have. They don't have fighting backgrounds, which teaches you about discipline and training, and they didn't have the struggle in their early life where they were like peeling KFC to keep them going. And I think when you understand that, it's taking advantage of the younger people then. It's no longer leading, it's now taking advantage by portraying this lifestyle as something that you can get if you follow me on Instagram and buy my course and engage in this lifestyle. So all of a sudden it's not be confident in yourself and hold yourself with pride and stand up tall. It's fuck this other guy. If he's weaker than you can kick the shit out of him and steal his girlfriend, as Sam Harris says. If you're not good enough, I'm going to kick the shit out of you and steal your girlfriend. It's not like you should be a better person and this is why and this is how you do it, and like for the next 20 years put your head down a bit. It's not that. So that's why I think it's confusing as well, because as you said, not only does, and this isn't being patronising, but not like 18 is a fucking moron. I'm not saying 18-year-olds are, but I know what it's like to be an 18-year-old boy. And I think at that age, it's very easy to misinterpret that type of a message in a very negative way. So it ends up in me just having a bad attitude towards other people that doesn't stem from me being a confident, in control person. I'm just going to take the be shit towards women and be shit towards other guys and take what you want. And I mean, that's not necessarily a positive message coming from the Tates, as opposed to some of the other people that you've mentioned there. Like, for example, Huberman is very popular at the moment, but it's coming from a place of here's how to understand yourself, and here's psychology, and here's educate yourself, and still work hard, and he's trying to improve himself. Can I ask you a question? Personal question. You've decided to roll the sleeve up this time, with the last time you didn't have the tattoo out.
I don't know if it was intent. Okay. Maybe there's less of me not having them, but you're right. Actually, when I mentioned Huberman and the tattoos, like, oh, my sleeves are up. Because normally I would be mindful of it, and I just don't think like giving, and not that I make judgments of people who have tattoos, because I have tattoos, but I think sometimes it can take the presence and the connection away when you're drawn towards my arms rather than my eyes or my face or my words. So that's often, but I'm really warm today. So yeah, maybe that's why.
Does it, and this is not a psychology session, by the way, but do you feel that the judgment of people who might misrepresent you based on the fact that you have a tattoo, is that important to you? Or do you just feel like maybe the message you have is more important than how you're perceived by a person?
I think sometimes the message that I'm trying to get across, I just want it to be clear and not to be distracted by tattoos. And I think it can be like, like for me, if I'm looking at somebody and if they did have tattoos, I sometimes am overly drawn to that, and I'm no judgment of it because I have tattoos myself. But sometimes my eyes are looking at that, and I'm missing some of the points maybe. So I worry if I was giving a talk or I was giving a presentation at school, or I would normally have the sleeves down. So yeah, no debating with it.
Well, we've seen it now. It's on camera. So there's no hiding it.
Blur it out.
Yeah, I just think it's an interesting question because, like, especially in this world, in the media and the podcast and all the kind of stuff that we engage in nowadays, it's hyper accelerated, the sense of imposter syndrome or the sense of being judged, or and like I personally, I like tattoos, but there is an initial judgment there when you see someone who has tattoos. I don't know why. It's just inherent. I don't know. Is it a cultural thing? Is it attached to our watching movies of like fucking Hell's Angels and stuff like this? Oh, this guy might be a bit rough around the edges. I notice it sometimes as well. If I get off I have a motorbike, and I get off the motorbike and I take the helmet off, and I'm some dude rocked up on a loud bike with a shaved head, and people be like, "Your man's probably a bit," and I'm like, "Hi, I'm Dan." I couldn't have got it more wrong, like. But yeah, so I recognize that, but I'm also I'm conscious of it in the last couple of years, trying to really find my own voice on the podcast and be very comfortable saying the things I actually believe. It's all a part of it for me. Like, I'm not trying to create an identity for people to like me and like the podcast. I'm trying to have conversations as me, and that's been a struggle for me in the early days, and I'm getting more comfortable with it now. So I'm just interested because I deal with a lot of people who start this stuff fresh, and the go-to is to create a persona and put a persona out there. And what I've found is a lot of it is because we're not entirely comfortable in our own sense of identity. So bring us back to that identity question again. And I'm not suggesting that's why you wore the sleeves down, but I'm just saying it's an interesting part of us as well. And it doesn't have to be heroin on the streets and addicted to alcohol. It could be uncomfortable in your own skin and how you relate to people and how you interact as well. So it's all attached to this sense of identity.
What was the shift for you, Dan, to become more comfortable?
This is my podcast. I asked the question. Sorry. Let's move on. What was the shift? It's a good question. People have asked me sometimes. I have spoke to you about it as well. I've spoken on the podcast here, but I had a period of struggle in my life. I believe it was because I was a man child, had not developed the skills that I needed from my own sense of emotional resilience, which is a nice segue into the next part we're going to touch on here. But I believe that for years I didn't really know who I was, didn't think about it. I wasn't in a really bad place, but after the birth of my daughter, I really struggled because it was obviously this sense of responsibility that I felt was in complete conflict with my sense of my ability to deal with responsibility. And I completely crumbled under the pressure, and I struggled for a couple of years in a really, really, really bad way. And that was a catalyst for me to start to want to embrace responsibility myself, and through that I then started to meet all these people who were in this world, and I had the tools at my fingertips, and I had a good support network, and I had Jill and my family there. I had everything I needed. I didn't just have one good adult, I had a fucking army of people there that I could tap into. So I'm blessed, completely blessed. And whenever people say this, they're like, fair play. I'm like, nothing to do with me. It was all to do with my support network. They facilitated this for me, and now that's why I say to you, like, I'm addicted to learning more about this. So that was the catalyst, I feel. And what that did for me was made me extremely sensitive to seeing that pain everywhere. I can feel it everywhere now in the world. As when I talk about it, I'm like, I can see, I can't tell by looking at people, oh, they're really in a bad way. But if I interact with people, I get a really like painful sense of there's stuff here, and it's almost everybody really, and I feel that in myself too. So that's kind of my journey, and why I'm here sitting with you now and why we're talking about this stuff all the time is because I felt horrible, like really awful, and I know what that is now. So I want to be able to not feel like that again, but also I want to be able to embrace what it is, in my eyes, to be me, a man, responsible, a father, a partner, a friend, a business owner, to have some impact. And it's now no longer attached to ego. I don't really care what it looks like. So that's why on podcasts and stuff now, I'm a lot more who I actually am. If you meet me on the street, apart from maybe a bit more fuck, this is pretty much who I am like. If you meet me on a gar pitch, probably slightly different. But I'm starting to align a lot of the pieces of my life a lot more now, which makes me much more comfortable sitting here. Like I often say, ask me anything. I'll probably, either I'll tell you I don't want to answer that question, or I'll give you my honest opinion. I'll very rarely say something just to say it, or be to look a certain way. I say rarely because sometimes I still do it, and they're the things I'm trying to catch. I'm trying to, I was afraid to say something there. Sometimes I'll hear myself say something like, you little bitch, you were just afraid to say that thing you really wanted to say because you think people won't like you anymore, and that's natural and it's normal. But that's kind of been my journey. I've nothing figured out, but I think that was the catalyst for me. This just shattering of my illusion of me being a competent person. I was a victim mindset, the whole thing. And now I'm trying to change that. I'm trying to empower myself. That's kind of why I find it a bit easier now to just speak as I am on the podcast. Does that make sense?
This is great. Yeah, I think like it having to get so bad before it got better, you know, I think that low point of, and it's great to just even reference what a man needs at a time like that is that strong social support and that social network to pull you over the line. But that things had to get so bad for them to get so good, you know. And being our authentic self is really hard. It's really vulnerable, and we're at risk of people judging us. And if they don't love us or don't like us when we're authentically ourselves, that will bring a lot of shame for us, and we'll start self-doubting. Is that because we're bad, and we're trying to figure out who we are by our reactions with different people. So I think when you can just become really comfortable and assured of who you are, and be okay that not everyone's going to like you, and I think to have an impact in the world at all, not everyone's going to like you. That's just the nature of it. And that's okay. People aren't always going to want to hear what you've got to say. So, no, powerful story. It's great. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. Thanks for being interested in it. And thanks anyone who's still listening. There was a question I had for you you mentioned a comment there about, and it's off topic, but Hubin was talking about what women want. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So
I don't put you on the spot here.
No.
Because I feel like we do talk a lot about men on this podcast. It's not necessarily by design, but this is what I understand.
Yeah.
But also, like people, someone said to me, I think, did you mention me? Most of my listeners might be men. I have a 50-50 listenership. Wow. 50% of my listeners are female, which is really interesting to me because it is heavily dominated by, and I've had people reach out to me before trying to attack me for that. Just don't listen. If it's not for you, don't listen. I won't be upset. But like, I'm extremely interested. Like I said earlier on, if I can sort myself out as a man, the women in my life will have a better experience of me. My sisters, my mother, and my friends, Jill obviously, will have a better experience in their lives because I'm taking care of my shit. It's not their fault, it's my fault. Similarly, I believe that if women are able to do their own work, men will have a better experience of women. It's symbiotic, like where we complement and contradict each other. I think it's beautiful like that. I don't think we're all the same. And quote me on this, put it up and fucking throw darts at it if you want. We're not all the same, and I think that's beautiful. All men aren't the same and all women aren't the same, but definitely men and women complement and contradict each other. But I'd be interested in what Hubman said, 'cause I haven't heard that before, in terms of like what do women want, Padraig?
So like what stuck out for me is at the time that narrative was very popular of like, you know, treat women like dirt and they'll come back and do whatever you know, like real negative, narcissistic, aggressive attitude towards women.
It's like negging. Do you remember that book? It was like a dating expert dude.
Oh,
do you remember him?
The Game?
The Game. Was it Neil Strauss?
Yeah.
The Game. Yeah.
So he looked at what women are actually seeking for intimate relationships and what they're looking for. And what it was to be treated well and to be seeking kindness and to be treated with respect. And what was strange for me is having to listen to that and go, this is a strange narrative in comparison to everything else that's out there. And when you think about it, it's common sense. But he was looking at the studies of what are women actually looking for. And it was such a blip in all of the noise of this toxic culture, toxic narrative. I don't want to say toxic
Masculinity.
Don't want to say it because I don't like that word, because I think it puts people in a position where they are fearful to be masculine. And when I look at masculine men and men that I admire, who I think are amazing, they're caring fathers. They're just incredible people that you can rely on, that you can trust, and that they turn up. And that's masculinity for me. So and they should be really proud of that. And that's so the word, I think there's toxic people for sure, but I don't think it should be identified with the trades of what men want to portray, which is caring, looking after, being a protector, that's something to be so proud of. Like that's who you want in your circle. That all of those trades, that testosterone driven trades that have protected us for many years. Like when we're in trouble, you want that real strong masculine behavior around to protect you. And then I worked in the care system for years, and while we might have been working with hostile behavior and aggression with some of the young people because they had difficulty communicating what they needed, you needed both. You needed a very masculine approach and a very feminine approach, and children were drawn to both. They would seek the females for that caring, that kindness, and sometimes that female perspective came from a man. It didn't always have to come from a woman. And then they sought that real masculine to feel safe, to feel protected, to feel like they could push against it, like fight against it, literally sometimes pushing in that rough play. That's all that masculine approach. So we need both in our lives. They both are beautiful, and let's not hold shame against them. I just think we've kind of drifted in a space now where we're pushing men away from wanting to be men, and be proud of it.
Isn't it funny that we need an expert neuroscientist to tell us to be polite and kind and respectful? Like, it's fucking madness.
Madness. How have we been drawn to that and thinking, like, yeah, it's just I'm so disconnected from that world, but also my age. Like, I'm 39, and I'm looking at these guys, and they're talking about this is how you get women, but they're 20-year-old women who are like whatever. They're not seeking long-term marriage. They're seeking status, but that's all that's coming up on Instagram, and it's not the content that I'm looking for. It's the content that I delete and not interested in and skip past, and yet it keeps coming back up and back up and back up. So yeah, then amongst it all, thank you, Andrew, for highlighting the reality of what women are actually seeking, which is genuine kindness and love and care. Shock horror. Can I ask you a random question? You wouldn't mind just, you've gradually swayed, disappeared out of frame there. James be screaming at the Sorry,
screen
James.
behind there. It's not the narrative that you're looking for, but it is the I don't know. It's something that if you as a man or a woman, but in this case as a man, have not really become comfortable in yourself in terms of what you want out of a relationship, that's what you think you want out of a relationship. You want it to be quick, easy, the younger and the sexier the better, and the message on Instagram is, yeah, you can have what you want, become a high value man. This thing, I'm like, what a fucking weird phrase, because I want to be a high value man. I want to have good values. Just sort of like, and that sounds really like, oh, Dan's a real wholesome kind of guy. No, I want to be dependable. I want to be competent. I want to be confident. I want to be I want to have all these things thought about me. That's who I want to be in the world. Like when you put your hand out and say, that's what I want to be. So I have to work towards those things. But this idea of being a high value man because you have a nice suit and you have a fucking Bugatti and all this kind of stuff, fair play, those things are difficult to obtain. But a great quote I heard on Rogan, and again, I think it was Chris Williamson, so sorry, but I think Rogan actually said it, just because it's difficult to obtain doesn't mean it's valuable or it has worth. So like a private jet is difficult to obtain. Most of us will never get it. It doesn't make you a good man. It makes you someone who could attain a jet. Maybe you have a particular skill set in finance, you get a good job or something like that, or you work very hard. But a lot of these things can be false indicators of a well-rounded man, because traditionally to get these things, you had to have a lot of different aspects to your personality. You had to be charismatic and confident and competent and protective and kind and all this kind. You don't necessarily anymore. Like, you can make a quick buck online and you can blow up on Instagram overnight and make millions, and those millions are a false indicator of what makes a good man for a potential partner. So then you have partners, and again, not original thought here, these are narratives that I would listen to. Then you have partners, men, young women usually, or men, who look at the millions or the jet or the Bugatti or whatever it is and say, oh, that's the kind of man that I want, someone who has that, but they have the money, but not necessarily all of the other elements that make up a good, kind, dependable, value-driven man. So it's very, very confusing landscape at the moment there. But I liked that portrayal of it. Just because it's hard to get doesn't mean it's valuable or worthwhile. And it makes me think a lot about the stuff that drives me. Because sometimes you get caught up in the game. You're running a business. Yeah, I want more money. I want a nicer car, bigger house. And then I'm like, but is that actually in line with anything that I value? Is that when I put my hand? Hi, I'm Dan and I drive a 5 Series. Hi, I'm Dan. Yes, that is a Rolex. So no, that doesn't appeal to me. And at the outset, it does. On a really superficial level, I'm like, oh, I want that for the same reason, because I think it makes me a valuable man, because I see all these guys have. But then when I actually think about it, I'm like, no, I've no problem with nice things. I like cars and bikes and stuff like that. But really what I value is connection and family and friends and meaning and all that kind of stuff. And again, that sounds like, all right, Dan, yeah. If someone offered you a Rolex and said you had to give up one of your kids, you probably would. But when you sit down, when I sit down and think about it, I was like, okay, yeah, really figuring out what I value helps me to navigate this madness. But the problem is that's not how Instagram works, unfortunately.
It's not.
And that's why you keep getting hit with these fucking...
And I agree. I think like people are drawn towards it because, as you said, it's hard to obtain, or it seems flashy and it looks good. And would someone spending time with their kids at home in clothes from Dunnes Stores look good on Instagram? That's not going to sell for anyone.
Yeah.
Like it's not. It's all flashy suits, watches, all of this, 6-packs. That's their aim. But it's a push away from connection. And to look at careers, we have to be really mindful, particularly ourselves, entrepreneurs, like pushing our own career. Sometimes we can push away from what's really meaningful, and we have to be very careful of a salary. Those that are seeking a salary and they've obtained this fantastic salary, chances are they've worked very hard and are very disconnected from their family, their friends, people that they want to spend time with. When we see the Instagram life of them on a boat with a cigar and whiskey, we don't see the misery behind it. They're portraying the life that they want to portray. The Tates, it's a business, it's a franchise. It's not real. Like, they're not, with that casual walking and they're going, like, they know there's a camera watching them for all those moments. It's not, these aren't just, they caught them off a hop, that they're walking into their home cinema or whatever that looks like. So I think there's a real portray of this life of value. But when you really deep down, like, value is in the moments of the meaning every day. And the more you want all of that noise, is what I call it, the more disconnected you are from actually what's really important.
100%. I feel like I'm at risk of putting, it was my fault completely, pulling us away from, we're still within the boundaries, because we're talking about connection, identity, purpose. All of this was completely relevant. I've nearly sidetracked you completely from the whole OT side of this conversation. So I'm going to bring us back. We didn't actually leave the realm. We stayed within the lines, but I'm going to bring us back now to the final part of this conversation around, we have mentioned the struggles, we've mentioned the things that you would experience, we've mentioned a lot of the very, very common maladaptive behaviours that most of us, in my opinion, are on a spectrum of. If it's having 2 drinks a week or 200 drinks a week, if it's going on Instagram for 10 minutes or 10 hours, it's more about the intent, the identity and the connection and the values, I think, is what we've drilled down to here. And because something that sometimes gets very frustrating, we spoke about it before with medical models, we won't dive too deep on it, but obviously my fiance is on OT as well, so I've a bit of an insight into this too. It can be frustrating sometimes when everything is ones and boxes and numbers, and we know that there's a deeper root cause to most of this, but we have to play the game and give the diagnosis and refer to the department and whatever it is. So all of this conversation for me is very valuable for maybe people who have been through the system and it hasn't worked, who have people that maybe they could help, who maybe need a little bit of help themselves. It doesn't have to be a diagnosis. I'm not saying that thing is wrong. There's definitely massive value in medicine and therapy and all this kind of stuff. But as an adjunct, as another part of that puzzle, which it is, understanding identity, your own values, giving yourself space and time to sit and think about this stuff, looking for that one good adult, maybe being aware of the impact you have on other people. So that's the conversation we've had. But on top of that, some of the more practical things maybe that we can do as people, men, women, we're talking about adults, I suppose, now in this conversation. In your experience, in the work that you've done, things that you found have worked, that you like, that you think have massive value. Let's have a little conversation around that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I'm going to touch on, and I think it's a really good diagram for people to go and have a look at, and it's the PERMA V model. It's a positive psychology model. It's not related to occupational therapy, but it links in very well with occupational therapy. So it's a great way of looking at your life and seeing, are you living a meaningful life? So the PERMA V stands for, do we have positive emotions in our life? The E is for engagement. Are we engaging in the world in a positive way? Are we doing something that feels good for us? The R would be for relationships. How are our relationships? The M would be for, are we living a meaningful life? Are we doing something that we feel is meaningful to us? And then we have the A then, would be, are we accomplishing things in life? Are we winning? Are we doing things? Are we heading the right direction? And the V, which is so important, is looking at vitality. So without that, we have nothing. So vitality would look at sleep, nutrition, exercise, all things that we can function our body with. So I think it's really good to have a little look at that, and it will bring to light a lot of areas that you could improve in your life straight away, going, you know what, my emotions aren't really good. What am I doing for it? And so when somebody comes into the clinic, the first thing that I would ask is the basics, their vitality, what's going on for them. Are you eating? Are you sleeping? Are you moving your body? It's not very fancy, and it seems very it's simple, but the positive effects of a good night's sleep, moving your body, which I cannot advocate enough. We have little pharmacies working inside our body that will release all the chemicals that we need to manage our mood if we put our muscles under stress. We need to do it. It's a non-negotiable. If you have depression, anxiety, ADHD, it is 100% a non-negotiable for you, because you really, really need to do it. Some people can cope and manage life without moving to an extensive way. But if you have any of these going on for you, the number one thing I'd say, are you moving? Are you moving at all? If you're stagnant in your room and you're not leaving, I can tell you that's going to have a detrimental effect. So I look at that. I look at, do you have any meaning in your life? As in, what are you doing for yourself? What looks good for you? Are you moving in the right direction? Are you winning in life? And look at mindset as well. Look, we can touch on growth mindset. We can touch on forgiveness. If there is a lot of anger in them, we talk a lot about like what's going on for you emotionally. If you're angry at the world, or if you have an identity that you are not happy with, how do we shift that? So I think they're kind of some of the things that I would touch on with the adults that are coming through the door, not necessarily young people. A lot of them are just lost at the moment.
Yeah. You speak about that model from a therapist's point of view.
Yeah.
For me, listening to you, that's just something we should all basically to ask ourselves every day or every week. Like we could run through that very quickly in our own head and sit down. Am I doing these things? How was this week for me? How am I feeling? What's my mindset? Am I sleeping? Am I eating? Like a self assessment, really.
I have it pinned on my desk, so in the morning I have a look.
Good.
I'm like, am I doing it? And I would look at aspects of my own life that I'm not happy with, whether that be, am I getting enough emotional connection? And if I'm not, I'm journaling why and what's stopping me. And then I'll have a checklist to say, have I ticked the boxes that are going to help me have a meaningful life? But the PERMA V, you can look at it and go, you know what, this part of my life isn't good. And it's not going to be perfect. Life is hard and you'll miss some of the components, but it's a really good brief check-in to kind of go, you know what, this could be better. Or, you know why I'm not great for the last 2 or 3 weeks. I know why. There's nothing going on in this department. So
yeah,
I think
I think an important note for me personally to add there is a bit of self-compassion as well. So even if you're not doing, you're probably not, we're not designed to be doing perfect in all these areas all at the same time. And if you're not taking that as a sign that you're doing something wrong, just seeing it as an area you need to keep an eye on, or potentially something you can add a little strategy in. Am I not moving? Maybe I can do a 5-minute walk or 10-minute walk. It doesn't need to be, because I'm a demon for this. Like it was even yesterday, I was in the gym yesterday, and the phase of my football season at the moment, I tend not to do a lot of strength work because we're training so often. I want to keep the body fresh. And I was in the gym and I wasn't hitting the numbers I wanted to, but I was like, man, give yourself a fucking, because I've spent 20 minutes going, this is so shit, and you're going to take so long to get back to it, and then I'm comparing myself to other people. I have a lot of powerlifters come in here as clients. I'm like, I'm nowhere even in the same rail, but I'm like, why can't I be like those guys? And just like drilling myself. And then eventually I was at the point I was like, hold on a second, let's have a little look at what you're doing. You're doing all these different things. You're trying to be there for your family, trying to run your business, trying to play championship, but of course this is not going to be that. And also, why does it need to be there? So that's a lesson I've learned the hard way over years, that really negative self-talk. I've just tried to give myself it's not even positive now, it's just a bit of a break.
Yeah.
So give yourself a bit of a break on that stuff. So even if you're doing your Prymal and you're not there is no there. But just be moving in the right direction at your own pace.
And I think having the best, like I would reference this, like the best therapists, the best clinicians, the best, we're all imperfect. We're all just that's the evidence. That's what will improve. But then we're human beings and we're existing. Do we get it all right all the time? Absolutely not. The best of the best out there do not. They don't. They're just, we're all trying to figure it out. We're all trying to survive. We're all trying to do our best. And I've some clinicians that are amazing, and there would be specialists in the areas for working on managing sleep with kids, and they're like, my own at home at the moment is a bloody disaster, because they're human beings. Yeah. And we know the research, and we know if you apply it in this way that improvements will come. And then we're people.
Yeah.
And we're not clinicians in our own lives. We're not professionals in our own lives. We're just a person. So we're just trying to get through. But it is a good reference point. And I am hard on myself, probably too hard on myself sometimes, to ensure that I'm, I suppose, living a life that's true to me, but also being a positive advocate for mental health as well, that I'm not out speaking about this is what you should do and not doing it. So I'm very conscious of my own decisions to implement these strategies. But do I get things right? Do I have a cheeky chocolate bar here and there? Absolutely. Do I do things that one day I'm like, I'm not going for a run today? And like those things arise. I'm no David Goggins, nor do I ever want to be. And I think like the likes of David Goggins, or even hearing about the powerlifter, I love dipping into things and having a passion about it, but it'll never fully engross me. And for sure, and I'm looking at guys in their bench pressing, or you say that you're going to the gym, some of the questions that people ask me, what you bench or what you deadlift, I'm like, nothing. I actually don't do either of those, or whatever the machine is on and I feel that day. Because it isn't part of my identity to be the best at that.
Yes.
It's just to feel good. That is part of my identity. So I push these things to the limit that feels good to me, and don't latch onto these concepts that it defines you as a man if you can deadlift certain or you can bench press. Like when I'm asked that question, like I'm like, I haven't a clue.
Which is actually it's a much deeper point, and maybe you probably do know you're making this point, because oftentimes if we struggle with our identity, we want it to be something else, so we could very quickly like filter it into something else that seems healthy at the outset but could become quite obsessive.
Absolutely.
Like, I need to have the biggest bench in the gym and I'm going to achieve that at all costs. And that phrase, at all costs, genuinely there's costs to that. And you often find the people who, and like on the topic actually, because these guys would openly say it, some of the guys who come in here, incredible athletes. Some of these guys hold like national and international records in strength events and stuff like that. And I speak to them regularly, and one of my clients, Ian, he's really good at getting down to the core of this, and he talks about this. Like, your identity is completely caught up with being the strongest squatter in the room. Are you aware of that? They're like, yeah. Are there other parts of your life that are suffering as a result? Yeah. Relationships and all this kind of stuff. But this is the thing. And part of me is like, it's like the Goggins thing. Part of me is in absolute admiration of somebody who can do. I don't think I could do that unless I sacrificed. Even if I sacrificed everything else in my life, I don't think I could do that. So it's massive admiration. But I don't want to do it because it would require me sacrificing all the things I actually value in my life as well. So that's it. It's a great point to make there, that yes, getting into movement and healthy things is important, but again, it's the story and narrative you create for yourself around that, which is actually even more important. The same as with the drugs and the drink. Yeah. If you become obsessive about eating healthy, obsessive about running, obsessive about lifting, obsessive about whatever it is, it's still obsessive. It's still not. It's still another masking of what you feel are your insufficiencies, and that's something I've seen over a long time. I think about it a lot with my football career as well, because I'm coming towards the twilight years of my senior football career, and it's been a huge part of my life for the majority. I have played football in my life longer than I haven't played football. I played football since I was 7 or 8 years old, and I am 35 years old now. And it's a huge part of who I am, what I do, where I get my sense of belonging, connection, identity, purpose. You get a lot of validation. I'm like, that's going to go away soon. What am I going to do?
What are you going to do?
I have family, I have children, I have business, I have friends, and I'm really starting to try and focus or focus the same energy that I apply to my football in those areas. Like those areas are much more important than football, but also to, like you were saying, with getting the positive feedback from the healthy food as opposed to the drink. It's the story I tell myself, right, is this is where I get my validation. I go in and my son gives me a hug. I know you felt that. I feel it every single time I get that hug. I'm like, whoa, this is bigger than anybody saying great shot or that was some shoulder or whatever the hell they would say in the football pitch. I'm like, okay, this is part of this is a really good place to put some of that. Not all of it. I can't be completely consumed and obsessed with just being the best father, because then my relationship would suffer.
Absolutely. Or you don't get that hug that day. What does that mean to you?
I'm crushed because I don't get the hug. Or eventually when my kids grow up and move away, like, the fuck am I going to do then? I collapse. So I'm becoming aware of that now, and football has been a catalyst for me for that. But I just think it's a nice point to make there as well, as yes, there's maladaptive and unhealthy behaviours, but again, in some areas they could be healthy. Having a drink is a social lubricant if you're very aware, and that could be fine. I'm not advocating, but it could be fine. But also it could be very unhealthy to become completely consumed and obsessed by sports, if you're wrapped your identity in it. So yeah, man, it's all about those stories.
It is, and not to have that, like, I think it's good to have goals and achieve and to push and to grow and to build, but like for our own identity in a positive way. But if we have consumed everything into one component of our life, there's a great book, Peter Attia, I think his name is.
Peter Attia, yeah.
He speaks about it. I think it's Road to Character, and it speaks about, is your life your CV or is it your eulogy? So are people going to speak about all the things that you've accomplished in your life, or the type of man that you are?
Yes.
What are you swaying towards? So we can latch into it, and I have to mind myself and my identity of my job, because it is really important to me. And that I make sure that the eulogy holds strength in that as well. What I want to accomplish things in a professional capacity, I want to be seen as the dad, the partner, the friend, the son, all of those things. And those characteristics come to the forefront as well. I don't want to get lost in this, because if that's all you have and then you don't have it, where are you? You know? So I think, like, put your energy into positive things moving forward. Have more than one, and it's okay. And that, it's the same as that trauma identity. If you're a survivor or you're a victim, and this is all you are, you're one thing. None of us are one thing. We have a variety of different avenues, of variety of different roles that we have to play, as a friend, as a brother, as a son, as a partner, as a dad. All of these are actually our functioning roles. And then we have our employer. We might be an employee or an employer. You know, we have colleagues. We have all of these. We have loads of roles. You know, so be the best you can at them. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. You know, you're not just that. You're not just one thing.
100%. Yeah. And I'm going to wrap this up now, but there's actually a word that you've pretty much just answered there. We didn't touch on it specifically, but this idea of emotional resilience. For me, what you just described there is a form of emotional resilience. You're not overly extended in any of these areas. You have a good sense of self. You have a good grounding. You are really, really not necessarily completely formed in your identity, but you're solid in the kind of identity that you want to have, and the type of person you want to be, and the values that you hold. And if you have foundations in all those areas, you are going to be more emotionally resilient, because you're going to be less reactive. You're going to be less triggered. Your trauma, which we all have, is going to have less of a hold over you. It's going to be less of you. It's going to be something that happened in your life. It's not what you are. So all of that for me means you're going to have more resilience in general, physical and emotional resilience, based on everything that you've described today. If you can start to put some of those bits together, you're working on that emotional resilience. So would that be a fair assessment of it?
I would agree, yeah. And emotional resilience is, we spoke about what we would want from our own children, and that level of emotional resilience, that they can have the capacity to survive with the world. Not only do we want it from children, but we want it from adults. And confidence to lean into these decisions, and confidence that you're going to survive if you are rejected, or that you can lean in and go, I'm going to be okay. And that will be stemmed from having emotional resilience, having compassion for yourself and understanding, but confidence and emotional resilience. And they will come the strongest. They'll be the most heightened when we're our authentic self and we know who we are and we deliver that to the world. That's where they'll be the strongest.
Yeah. Jill mentioned to me, this is funny, Jill mentioned to me last night when you were coming on, as she did last time, she gave me some nice food for thought and some concepts to think about. And she mentioned a concept in OT that she had learned about And I forgot it. I was going to ask her about it this morning, and we had a fucking stupid argument because I left clothes I'd folded on the table. It's like, fuck, I'm not going to ask her now. I'll just go. But now I've forgotten it. But I know that it was like a 3-word phrase. I'm going to put it in the spot here now. But it was doing was a part of it. Was it being?
Doing, being, becoming, or doing, becoming, and doing.
It was this concept. And what she said to me, the most powerful for that for her was doing.
The doing. The being, belonging. That, like I am on the spot,
completely put you on the spot. But it leans into most of what you said today. It was about the doing, the moving, the action, the leaning into that. Obviously, being and belonging are, when I think about being and belonging, they're more outcomes and senses of feeling. Am I being? Am I present? Am I? But the doing is something that anybody listening now, it's a little less abstract. You can do, you can move, you can pick that thing that maybe, as you said, is the lowest barrier to entry that you like, that you enjoy, and you can start to do it. And by doing it, you'll get some more of that positive feedback. And then by getting the feedback, you can be a bit more comfortable in be, and then you get that sense of belonging. So I really like that.
And to not always wait until you're motivated enough to do it is a really key component. Like, we can change our emotional state by moving our body into a state of doing. Like, so if we are like feeling I can't do this, and it's a very hard line. They say movement can create motivation, but so it's a very hard thing to say to somebody who's demotivated and doesn't want to do it. But if they can just start doing, and you will start feeling better. You just need to move. So it's hard, but I think we can change our emotional state by changing our physical state. It's really important.
Beautiful. Padraig, another powerful conversation that I absolutely butchered by taking you off into the weeds in several areas there. But thank you so much for your time. As I asked last time, if people want to reach out, have a conversation, if they want to engage with you in some way, is that allowed? Is that okay?
Absolutely. You can find me on Instagram, The OT Coach, and my website is www.theotcoach.ie, and also my Gmail account is padraig.theotcoach@gmail.com.
Beautiful. So, anything coming up that we should be aware of? Anything happening in the life of Padraig?
Nothing, busyness, but all positive stuff. Work is flying it, and but all good stuff. Nothing.
And Padraig is going to be much more active on social media, even though it's toxic. He's going to be much more active to share this wonderful value with the world. So we'll get a lot more from you. But I'm going to say this. I'm going to have you on again, because we touched off maybe 25% of the stuff that we wanted to touch off there. But I think it was a nice conversation there. We're over the 2-hour mark anyway. If I can read this clock properly, I think we are over the 2-hour mark. But thank you once again for making the drive up. Really, really enjoyed it as always. And we'll see you in the next one.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan. Thanks so much.